Hi, the topic of my presentation today is punishment, prisons, and penal tourism in Argentina. I chose this topic because I am a criminology and criminal justice and social justice double major. My husband is from Argentina, so I thought this would be a really good way to relate my general studies to to learning more about the country of Argentina, which I don't know a whole lot about. And I also have a general interest in prison reform and criminal justice reform as a whole. My research process was fairly simple. One night I just spent a few hours in the Hamlin Library looking at online resources. I generally, for criminal justice, use a browser, or not a browser, I guess I don't know what it's called, a library searcher called Sage, and that's where the majority of the criminal justice information is that's relevant to my studies. I also, for the sake of trying to find things that are more Latin American and maybe information in Spanish, I tried to take a look at LexisNexis as well, and a few other places, but eventually I just stuck to what I know and got most of my information from Sage. I also had one book from the Augsburg Library. My original idea was the Ushuaia jail. It was apparently a jail / prison that was located in Patagonia, which is the southernmost point of Argentina. And as I was searching, I found that there was essentially no information available. All that they talked about was the museum it was converted into. There wasn't any information about the history of it or the conditions or the types of people that were there. So then I started searching for prisons in Argentina, just kind of generally, or punishment in Argentina. The majority of the results that were not about the dirty war were on penal tourism. So I thought, well, what is this? And because that was where I was able to get a lot of my information, the subject of my paper changed to something I didn't even know existed at the beginning of the semester. So the history of prisons in Argentina and punishment, of course. The first prison in Argentina was built in Buenos Aires in 1876, and until about the mid-1900s, most prisons had a very strong rehabilitative focus, specifically in labor therapy and religion. So labor therapy was just like, you'll work very, very hard, and you'll work so hard that you love work more than committing crime, I guess. And then Argentina is also known for its Catholicism, so there were churches in every prison, and people, especially the women who were incarcerated, were required to go to church, and it was the widespread belief that religion was really something that would change people's criminal ways. Later in the beginning to mid 1900s, there were a lot of doctors and specialists that were working in the prisons. And this wasn't because people needed like checkups or medical evaluations. It was because there was a new theory that had come out called criminal atavism. And Lombroso was Italian, and he was the founder of this. And basically what that was just trying to determine the cause of criminality based on physical characteristics. So these doctors and specialists were there like measuring the circumference of inmates' skulls and seeing how far away their eyes were from each other, and judging if you're tall and really muscular, you're supposed to be more criminal than someone who's short and really skinny, and things like that. And my primary source was something that I thought was really interesting. It was a book that this man had written, and he had gone from the mid-1950s to about 1960 traveling the world to see what prisons were like. And he said the Argentine prisons were the best in the entire world. They were great. There were so many amenities. The prison in Buenos Aires had just built a minimum security unit for the people who were transitioning back into society. And it was crazy, he said that they had a swimming pool, they had a formal dining room with tablecloths and flowers as centerpieces. They could have conjugal visits, which is like, if your wife comes, you can actually have sex with her versus like you can't, no touching or whatever. So he said there's these conjugal visits, and it makes so much sense for people who are transitioning in society, because then, they'll be accustomed to what normal life is like, and it won't freak them out. So it was this widespread belief that these amenities were beneficial and just awesome, which is very, very different from the views on amenities in prisons today. The current state is very different from this last account I could find in 1958. Essentially, what I believe happened is, like I said, there's the dirty war in Argentina, and it's very hard to talk about the history of Argentina at all without discussing this, but this was this period of dictatorship of the whole country where about 30,000 people just disappeared. And the effects of this still plague the legal system. Like, there's still a huge distrust in the government, and also there's a lot of social issues that need to be fixed. So it's not entirely surprising that things like prison conditions were put on the back burner while Argentina was kind of trying to pick up the pieces of this situation. Eventually, in the 2000s, maltreatment and understaffing was noticed internationally by, I can't remember which, but a humanistic organization, and they reached out to the president of Argentina and was like, you need to get your act together. In some prisons, the sewage system doesn't work. They aren't getting fed properly. There's a lot of violence. There's understaffing, and they just said enough's enough. You don't even meet the international standards for what prisons should be like. They're very bad. The murder rates in prisons were increasing. I believe I read that, they were already very high. The Buenos Aires Penitentiary normally they had one murder per week. Inmate on inmate murder. And then in the 2000s, the murder rate rose from 1 inmate per week to 3 inmates per week. There were 3 murders per week. And like I said, 1 murder a week is a lot. 3 murders per week is insane. And these were at the maximum security facilities. So for just a comparison, and Minnesota's criminal justice and especially the prison system functions very well in comparison to others, but Minnesota's maximum security facility, Oak Park Heights, has had 1 murder in 33 years. So really, that's how bad that these prisons were. And the case study I wrote about in my paper is the Mendoza prison. They no longer have a functioning sewage system. It is broken. Inmates who are there, there are people still there, and they defecate in bags. They have to urinate in buckets. It's just horrible, and they have sewn their mouths shut in protest. Some of them are fasting in protest. It's very serious issues that are not being addressed. Similarly, not similarly at all. There's penal tourism, which is so different from everything that's going on. There's these current issues that are not getting addressed. These poor living conditions, maltreatment, understaffing, and then people are, these prisons are being built, and people are going to visit these prisons to try to learn, what is it like to be in prison? What is it like to be incarcerated? Who is incarcerated? What does a prison look like? How do they work? So it's basically educational entertainment, and people can go tour these old prisons. Obviously, there's not prisoners in there anymore, and kind of see what they're like. But it's important to remember that the state is who is controlling what information is displayed. So the public is generally very misinformed about what the real issues in prison are and the current issues that exist today. So there's nothing really about maltreatment. There's nothing about human rights violations or poor living conditions or defecating in bags. It's, here's how the guard uniforms have changed over time, and here's pictures of inmates studying Catholicism in the chapel, and here's different types of handcuffs, things that are, apparently more interesting and, I guess not as depressing as what's actually going on in the prison system. And just in general, it's kind of, and I think all countries are guilty of this, just trying to show this really benevolent government, look at all the cool things we've done, look how great these prisons were, and completely, there's just a void in the discussion of the bad things that are going on, the issues that still need to be addressed. Here are some pictures that are related to penal tourism. There are people touring museums. The 2 photos on the right are the Ushuaia jail that's down in Patagonia. And the top one is the outside and the bottom is the inside, obviously, where you can see the doors for each cell. And then in between the doors, there's photos of what it was like years ago. On the left, there's this lady, and I believe this is in the Buenos Aires Penitentiary Museum. And it's just, I thought it was just the perfect photo to summarize what penal tourism is. It's like this lady with sunglasses on her head and a watch and nice clothes and a purse, like, hey, I'm in a jail cell, take a picture of me. And without, I think, really kind of discussing, what has happened in that cell. Was there maltreatment? What has this prison been like for other people? It's kind of just like a photo opportunity. So I think additionally, if I had more time or I wanted to write, a 50-page paper, I would probably look at some of the more recent changes for prisons and, kind of the whole system, especially reform, if there has been any reform in the past 5 or so years. I would take a look into Spanish resources, like resources in Spanish, to see if I could uncover more information related to my topic, because it's very possible that the information I'm looking for just hasn't been studied in English yet. I think I would also look into how many prisons have been turned into museums in all of Argentina, or maybe in the world. Like, is this a growing thing? And then also, who visits these museums? I think that's something really important to look at, especially considering the lady on the last page. Is it an international audience? Is it residents of the country? Who's going there? So in general, this is what I've learned about punishment prisons and penal tourism in Argentina. I hope it was a little bit interesting to you, and maybe you'll be able to go visit one of these places someday. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.